Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Flowwise Leadership Podcast. My name is Subbu Ramalingam. I'm an entrepreneur, healthcare executive, and a leadership coach. My goal in this podcast is to deconstruct world-class leadership, human performance, through conversations with exceptional leaders across various fields. Through these conversations, you will hear from individuals who embody profound wisdom, living a life of high performance, making major impacts in their field and in global communities. The folks I bring to the podcast also tend to often live in an effortless state, a state often described as a state of flow. Today's episode, I had the privilege of speaking with MR Rangaswamy. He's an entrepreneur, investor, community builder, and a philanthropist. MR is the founder of Indiaspora, a nonprofit that unites global Indian leaders from various different backgrounds create positive change across the globe. He's an early pioneer in Silicon Valley angel investing since the 90s. He was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and recognized on the Forbes list of investors. I'll tell you, his list of accolades and accomplishments is a long one, and he's a very humble leader and human being. Most recently, in 2024, MR and his organization, Indiaspora, partnered with the Boston Consulting Group to release the India Diaspora Impact Report, showcasing the major contribution of Indian Americans, the U.S. economy, philanthropy, science, technology, and education. In our discussion, we got into some unique aspects of the immigrant journey, its challenges, successes, and key lessons learned. We also explored how communities can come together, drive meaningful, far-reaching change locally and globally. Get ready for a concise, yet powerful episode filled with practical insights and incredible wisdom. Welcome, MR. This is incredible to have you in this podcast as a guest. You've been a leader for a number of decades in the community here in the US. You are the founder and the president of Indiaspora, a global diaspora community. Tell us a little bit more about you and your immigrant journey in the US.
Thank you, Subbu, and thanks for having me. Again, my journey was very similar to many of those who came in the 70s. Just to give a little historic perspective, 60s is when the civil rights movement started and the Civil Rights Act was signed, which then led to the Immigration Act, which for the first time in 65 actually allowed non-whites to legally immigrate to the US. And that's what opened the initial gates for the Indian community to legally migrate to the United States. I was part of that early group of people in the 70s who came here to study. We all had the aspirations and objective to settle down here and be participant in the American dream. We have to really thank Dr. Martin Luther King and leaders like him who had the foresight to fight for civil rights, which then led to Immigration Act, opening up the doors to people of color. We should never forget that. If not, you and I won't be having this podcast here today. But I came here like a typical student in those days, came here to do my MBA, but then things were quite different than today. Contrasting it, when I came, I had to find my brother's friend who lived in New Jersey. My flight was coming into JFK, and somehow he had to spot me in the crowd. And since I only had $8 in my pocket, in those days, that's what the Indian government allowed. Indian government is more liberal today. But if you imagine you came with $8, you had to make sure someone met you and took you to their residence and put you up and got you settled. My brother's friend fortunately found me, took me in, made me feel at home. And then I had to, in those days, go visit my brother, and he was in upstate New York. So the only way to get there in those days, believe it or not, was a Greyhound bus. I don't think most of your listeners today would know what a Greyhound bus is. Today it would just be take a simple flight or drive or whatever, right? So I took the bus and went to my brother's house. And again, contrast. The reason I went there was also to collect spices and all the food items that one needs when you go to college that reminded you of home, all the powders and all the dolls and everything else. So she packed all that for me neatly in a box, and then I made my way to Ohio. But needless to say, on the Greyhound bus to Ohio, someone stole my luggage. Here I am. I end up on campus with half my luggage missing, including the pots and pans and the spices. But then that's when America's spirit shows up. My host family heard about this and immediately went to the local Kmart at that time and bought all the pots and pans and tried to buy spices, although they were not quite successful with that. But you can see the journey in those days was contrastedly very different than one would come to today. There was an international student union. There weren't that many Indians there. We had Iranians and Nigerians and all kinds of people coming together. And Indians were one group within that overall foreign students. Again, very different today. You go into any campus, there'll be thousands of Indian students. You'll feel right at home. That was my initial foray coming to the US.
You had a very different journey. Thank you for mentioning MLK and others who've actually really fought for this. And several leaders, people like you, came in early. But the journey is so different, as you mentioned, for different kinds of people from a legal immigration standpoint. There is a whole lot of people in the late 90s and then most recently who come in for work. They become a green card holder or a citizen, continue to contribute. And obviously, there's a huge student community. People like you came as students in a student experience. What are you hearing from the community in terms of challenges and also some of the comforts they already have?
When we graduated, we got a practical training visa. You went and got a job. And then when you went and got a job, they applied for your green card and you got that within 6 to 9 months and you're done. You're on your way to becoming 4.5 years later, a citizen and so forth. It was a very different path. Today, the path is fraught with risk, both positive and negatively. So today you can come on an H-1B and you're working in a company and suddenly the company doesn't need you anymore.
Yep.
They lay you off. Then people are not aware of the rules that in 90 days, you better find another gig or you're gone. And some of these people who have stayed for 3 years or 6 years have settled down in the US. The families are here. They've bought a house. They have a mortgage. They have all kinds of obligations to the US. And suddenly they're in this dilemma, right? So people today, I would say students coming in to the US, it may appear the process is much smoother. The discovery of a college, getting a student loan, getting the visa is much more automated and processed. But the risks are magnified these days, especially with all the anti-immigrant rhetoric, that this could be shut at any point in time. I think a student or an immigrant today needs to really assess the risks involved in coming to the US and really be fully aware before they commit to making that journey. Because yes, the Indians are the highest number of foreign students in the US. Yes, the Indians spend $10 billion a year in the US as students, but they may never get a work visa or they may be sent home. So that risk should be assessed. Very different. One hand, millions of us here who can help new immigrants, all that stuff is much smoother than when I came and I was one of the few people on campus who are Indian and finding my way to campus was hard. Today, it's very easy and smooth compared to those days, but the risks are much, much higher.
Thank you for that, MR. And for the audience who don't know your Indiaspora journey, you've actually worn several hats in a number of decades from an entrepreneurship perspective and also community building. You really literally built a community in LA for the Indian diaspora. What moved you to start Indiaspora with others? And then what continues to inspire you and motivates you to continue to keep going, to serve the community and also beyond the community, pretty much America in general and also globally? So what really drives you every day?
You have to look at your life in the US. You come as an immigrant. Initially, you tend to gravitate to people like you. And that's why when we started in Diaspora, we found there were hundreds of successful diaspora organizations. The Tamil Sangam, the Gujarati Samaj, Marathi Mando. These are all groups that coalesce around a language or a state they come from in India. And you're very comfortable. You talk your language, you celebrate your festivals, you eat your own food, and it becomes a nice, cozy environment and ecosystem for you. But what that also does is it keeps you away from mainstreaming yourself. Are you only going to the temple and only going to your religious festivals? Are you partaking in more of the mainstream activities that bring you closer to your neighbors, your colleagues at work who are non-Indian, and so forth? I think that's something for us to, again, take time to specifically look at our own lives as an immigrant and say, okay, what does my life look like today? What percentage of time do I interact with my own ethnic community or my own DNA of Indians? And how much time, effort, and investment do I make in truly becoming an American? I think that card is on the table for every one of us to assess and say, what changes do I need to make? Because the one thing we don't want to be known is to just be Indians. We only work with Indians and relate to Indians and don't really assimilate. I think that's something we need to be aware of as we lead our lives in the US, is to make sure that we're living here, our jobs are here, our paycheck comes from here. We should contribute to the overall community at large than our own ethnic community. So that's a big thing we found when we started in diaspora. A lot of Indians were happy just dealing with their own kinds of people. And when you go and say, you got to mix it up, a lot of people understand they had to do it. They liked it. Some people may be comfortable in their own environment. That was one of the challenges we found.
You hit a really important point, MR. Leadership and healthcare. There is a lot of need for all different types of communities within the US, especially in healthcare, where we, as a country, we're not the best. At the same time, we spend a lot of money. There's a lot of healthcare issues that can be solved by smart people from the Indian American community. And the solution is actually for everybody. What a couple of examples of actions people can take to get involved a little bit more.
As everyone knows well by now, Indian Americans are the richest demography in the US amongst any ethnic community. Highest earning income, lots of millionaires, doctors, lawyers. Look across any profession, you'll find Indian talent there. I think because of the educated nature of our community and the success driven mindset, we are leaders in so many places. But with that comes a lot of responsibility. If you're making a lot of money, it means you need to give more back to society. Indiaspora is particularly focused on, should we be giving back? How much should we be giving? Is it easy to write a check, but can we also give time? Check is the easiest part. Writing a check is so easy compared to saying, I'm going to take 4 hours a week and go volunteer at a soup kitchen, or I'm going to be mentoring kids in the public library, whatever be it. So really taking a look at your time and money put together, that's one. And second, not only looking at our own community, but the greater community you live in, the local public library, your own school, the hospital, soup kitchen. Just look beyond yourself. I think that should be something we need to focus on. And that's why we do that quite a bit. We have a philanthropy summit. We have an annual India Giving Day. There are many ways we're trying to get our community to give and give generously, both our time and money.
Think beyond that. Think beyond just the communities. Yes, it's great to give to the community you are part of, but think beyond that to make an impact, because we have the capacity to do it, because as a community, we're generally very successful here. You have a event coming up, bringing in a lot of different leaders across the globe. Tell us a little bit more about that. We'll also put this in the show notes. What drove you to bring all these leaders across the globe of Indian diaspora?
It took a long time. It seems we're doing that today, but I started in diaspora 13 years ago as a nonprofit. And a nonprofit's journey is more challenging and tougher than a for-profit. I wish sometimes it's a for-profit entity. I could lay down metrics and goals and hire salespeople, and lo and behold, we'd be much further ahead. But as a nonprofit, you got to bring the whole community with you. We started in the US. And in fact, the initial start was, can we just get Indian Americans together to be a force for good? So this meant not only where I live in San Francisco, it's not just the tech community, but really doctors, lawyers, academics, artists, regular business folks, students, everybody in the community together, because we want to be totally inclusive. And every religion, whether you're Hindu or Sikh or Muslim or Christian or Buddhist, we respect all religions. all professions, really to bring that entire community together. That's what we did in the US to begin. Started doing that and really making sure that the community in the US was all truly integrated, working together, helping each other, and so on and so forth. That's how we got started. And within that, there were many different elements to it. One is, how do you get involved in the community? You can get involved in the community through giving, but also the other part is public service. Can we run for elections? Can we be in public service in an administrative capacity? So these are all things we encouraged. So as a community and as individuals in this community, we wrote checks to anybody with an Indian name in 2012 and 2014 who ran for office. If your name was Kanna, Krishnamurthy, Kamala, we wrote checks to all of them to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then lo and behold, in 2017, they all got elected. So we said, not only are we 1% of the population, now we're 1% of Congress. And we had a big gala in DC and so forth. What that did was it created a platform, and we were a catalyst to hundreds of people now saying we can run for office. So in the last election cycle, over 300 Indians ran for office across the US. School board, city council, mayor, all kinds of races. And now you see the results of that across the country. So it was community engagement, it was running for political office, all these elements, and then supporting other communities. During the BLM crisis, we stood up in support of our brethren. There was anti-Semitic issues, anti-Asian issues. We stood up with our brothers and sisters. These are all things the community needs to do to make sure everybody else knows we're there and that they would cover our back in the future. We had to undertake all these things first in the US, and then we decided we'll open up chapters in other countries. So we have a chapter now in Canada, in the UK, in Singapore, UAE, Australia, and we also have an office in India because there are a lot of Indian diaspora that go back and forth. This effort took a dozen years. And the combination of that really is now do a Davos for the global Indian. Because our community now, just to give you some facts, Subbu, it's 30 million diaspora. We're the largest diaspora in the world. US is the largest and most successful at 5 million. But we have large communities in the UAE and Australia and Canada and Singapore, UK. You bring them all together, these are successful people. Now we want to bring these folks together at our Indiaspora Forum for Good in Abu Dhabi, where we want to discuss new models for the world. Could this community create new ideas in AI or climate change or healthcare that you're involved with, or other areas like digital public infrastructure and so on and so forth? What can this community do to give back to the world and society at large? That's the big, bold goal for the Indiaspora Forum for Good. And we've seen tremendous response. We have shut our registrations down. We're already at our max capacity of 500 global leaders. We are represented in over 25 countries throughout the world. And all of us are getting together next month in Abu Dhabi to really take on the biggest challenges in the world.
That's fantastic. Big impact, lots of problems to solve in the world. I was actually looking for tickets, to be honest with you, and I'm sure I will come for the next one. You mentioned supporting people to run in political office, to make an impact across all communities. You've been at the White House, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side, working at a bipartisan level, lots of bills that you actually worked. Tell us a little bit of insight around how the energy has been in the last few years, working with the White House, working in the bank, how the support has been and looking at emerging leaders. What else we can do differently?
I think the first thing our community had to do was to get represented. And that's why when you had 1% of Congress now being Indian, people in Washington, D.C. said, hey, these guys are a force. We got to work with these folks. They can write checks. That's very important in D.C. So once we established that, once we had politicians, and a lot of people going into every administration, I think that journey has started and will continue. So with every subsequent administration, the Obama administration to the Trump administration to the Biden administration, and now back to the Trump, you'll see increasing number of Indians in the administration. Even now in the current administration, you see so many Indians who have been nominated and are being inducted into the White House. I think we've established that role as Indians being people who want to do public service, who want to give back. So that's happened. What we also had to do along the way was to show the impact of the Indian Americans on society. And that's a report we recently did a year ago with Boston Consulting Group, where we set out to look at 40 different metrics of how the Indian community is impacting the US. For example, we're 1.5% of the community now of the US. We pay 6% of the taxes. We are 75,000 doctors here in the healthcare space. We're 10% of the physician population in the US. We serve 30 million Americans. Same thing with academics. We have 22,000 academics, but they teach 3 to 5 million college students. So in every aspect of society, we're making an impact. It's not about generating money or wealth. We're actually helping Americans. That report is out and it's being well received and talked about. I think people are looking at our community a little differently than saying, hey, he's a tech guy, or he's a doctor, or she's a lawyer, whatever. They look at us differently and say they're Americans. They're helping all of America, not just themselves.
That was a fantastic report. We put it on the show notes as well. I know
Yeah.
there was also a good humorous view of the report that came out, last week. So we'll put that out there. That really shed a light on the comprehensive nature. I started in tech for the first few years and no longer in tech, but more on the business side. But it's like, oh, he's from tech or she's from tech. It's typically a branding that goes on, but at the same time, the impact, as you mentioned, across the spectrum. I'm really looking forward to hear about the success of the Dubai event that is happening later in February. But for folks in the US, outside of the Indiaspora, for someone who's actually living in a smaller city, you're in the San Francisco area, I'm in Philadelphia, I'm closer to New York and DC. But for folks who are listening, who are in a smaller city or a suburb, what are a couple of things that you would encourage to really get involved?
So a couple of things. Follow us on all the social media platforms. Go to our website, indiaspora.org, and subscribe to our newsletter. It's one of the best. You get informing everyone about what is happening in the greater community. We also do a lot of online programs. Yesterday, we had 3 young tech entrepreneurs talk about their journeys. They started companies in their 20s and how they were doing. We do a lot of online programs around women's issues or young people and many other related areas. You can participate at no charge in any of those. And then for the people who want to contribute monetarily to Indiaspora and support it, there's a whole different path of becoming a member, a very invitation only type process that we go through. In general, we are supportive of the entire community, but what we'd ask people in a smaller place to do is self-organize. Have your own little communities where the key thing you have to do is to involve everyone. Don't just get the tech CEOs together, get the doctors and the academics and the lawyers and everybody else who are representative of the community together. And do your own things. For example, during COVID, Indiaspora raised in 1 month $15 million for relief in India, but we also raised $1 million for food banks in the US because there was such a big problem in the US as well. So do your own causes, your own charities, your own programs locally. Don't wait for someone. Just start up. Just do your own thing, and nothing has to be huge.
That's fantastic advice. Follow-up question. This is close to my heart in a way. Indian Americans, leaders in general, we work a lot. We're also known for our hard work, business, etc. You are someone who has incredible energy. You're doing a lot of different things. How do you keep yourself balanced? What are a couple of things you do, and what are the things that you encourage, especially emerging leaders, to make sure they don't get burned out? Because we're an ambitious community, and that also comes with a cost in terms of health. So a couple of thoughts from your side would be fantastic.
I'm glad you brought this up because our community really doesn't like to have conversations around mental health or depression. It's great that our prior Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, brought this up across the board, not just within our community, but America in general, that mental health, depression, loneliness, these are all issues we all need to face up to. And this is something that we are also having to have more conversations about. People coming out and talking about mental health. In our Abu Dhabi forum, we have a famous former cricketer and the sister of one of the biggest movie stars in India talk about mental health. and what happens, what are the challenges. These are things we need to talk about because both at our level, but also as parents, we have to really be keeping track of our kids to make sure they're not going down that slippery shoe and that they're seeking help. And you don't treat that as stigma when they come to you and say they're depressed. It's actually give them help and support. And that is something we are also trying to educate. It's great that the Surgeon General has brought that up as an issue, but I think looking forward at our community is to really be open and supportive of our society, of our community when we go through these issues that are typically stigmas.
Fantastic. Thank you for mentioning that. He's got some incredible books advocating for some of the social media restrictions, especially for kids, and also the warning against alcohol from a cancer standpoint. That was like some seminal work in that starts with creating awareness and removing the stigma. What things that you do for fun that charges you so that you can serve more, give more to all the communities?
I tend to do a lot of walking. That's my way of taking time off. I try to walk 5 miles a day. Manage to happen most of the time, miss it sometimes as well, but just having a habit of walking, that way you're not on your phone, you're just walking and your mind is in a different zone. That's something I do. And then, of course, another good outlet is watching sports. Of course, I watch cricket because all my friends are cricket mad, but I'll let you know a little secret. My favorite sport is a very obscure sport called Australian rules football.
Yeah,
Uh,
awesome.
it's in between rugby and American football, and I love that sport. I get my time off by watching those kinds of games and stuff. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, but main thing is walking.
Fantastic. MR, your energy and then your passion to give to a lot of different communities and also your leadership is so inspiring. Thank you for coming on to the podcast. Have a fantastic event in Dubai, and I look forward to hearing from you again and looking forward to have you in the podcast in the future as well. Thank you,
Thank
Amar.
you. Thank you so much, Subbu. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can hear and subscribe to Flowwise Leadership on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and Substack. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a comment and let us know how we can improve, including suggestions for new guests. I created Flowwise Leadership to offer a comprehensive program for leaders to lead with flow and thrive with the power of wisdom. Drop by flowwiseleadership.com for more information to start your journey of transformation. Until the next episode, thank you and have a great day.